Hey everyone, I hope you're doing okay today. Today the video is a little bit different to what I was going to do. It sort of fell through, that's okay, but what we're going to be doing instead is looking at a little tiny program that I have started to develop this morning. It is going to be a mental health oriented program application. This is just one small part of that. Mental health is something that I am quite passionate about. I have my own lived experience. You may get to hear about that in a future video, but not so much in this one. So what we're going to be doing then is to have a program which will start by displaying, or allowing us to start with a positive quote and then going to the next and the previous ones. And we're going to look at the code behind this to see how that happens. So the first thing we should probably start with is let's run the program and see what happens from there. So initially you don't see anything. There's a single button there which you can click on, and then there's next and previous buttons which are disabled. We can also resize our form, and the controls will grow accordingly. And so when we click on this button here, we get to see a quote here, and we can then go to the next or the previous ones. We could start with another random one here, and again, proceed from there. So how did this all happen or come about? Well, basically, one of the things one of the things I don't like doing is to rewrite code or reinvent the wheel. So with that in mind, this program here will be split up between the user interface and, let's say, a model, if you want to call it that. The list of quotes, by the way, comes from a text file, so that quote list is separated from the user interface, and we can see how that comes together. So what we're going to be using here is some randomization code here, provided by Lazarus, or no, I should say free Pascal. Nothing fancy there. We're going to be using a string list, reading from the string list, and so on. So the text file that we read from basically has a list of quotes in it, and these basically contain the person who the quote is attributed to, and then you have the quote itself. They are, each line or each quote is separate. It has the author separated from the text by a comma, and you then have the double quotes being used as delimiters on the items. So when we have a quote, then you can see that we do have an author and some text there. I'm making a constructor which will take in a string, and then we can extract the individual elements somehow. We also have a quote list. And because we want to start with, let's say, a random position, we also need to be able to know where we are to go to the next one or to the previous one. And then we basically have our constructor, destructor, and what is the quote we're going to be grabbing. So when we want to look at the individual quote here, we're going to be using one of the string helper functions to basically split the string onto a comma or on the comma, and that will basically convert this string here into an array. So the array then has parts 0 to n-1, where the author is the first part, the text is the second part. What you'll find also is in the list then some of the elements have nothing or an empty string for the author, and if that is the case, then I'm just going to assign it to a none. The other thing I'm also doing here, because these strings are delimited by double quotes, I will remove them as well when we convert that string into our individual parts. So the next part then is, so that it basically encompasses a single quote. now we have our list of quotes, and to basically handle those we have a list that we load from file into a string list, and because we're all good programmers, when we are finished with that list we should free that list, releasing the memory that was used. And then we have our function here, which will, given some position, it will return either a random string or it will go to the previous one or the next one, and that will then get returned to the calling function. And also it does handle wrapping either backwards or forwards. So we will stop there on this particular unit then, because that's all there is to it. And now we're going to jump into the user interface. So that code, by the way, can be used, let's say on an Android, in a web browser and so on, especially if you're going to be using something like Pas to JS, so you want to convert to JavaScript. So here we have our form with our label, our two buttons, or the third button here to show me a positive quote. So when so if we were to go into the code for this particular form here, the very first thing is we have in the form creation, we basically will call the randomize function, and that will basically allow our random function to actually choose something at random each time the program runs. Then we create our quotes, which result in the quotes being read from file, etc. And here, to stop the user starting by clicking the next or the previous buttons, we make sure that they are currently disabled. And because I do have a value or a caption for my label, I'm just going to make sure you don't get to see it. So now when the user then clicks on that button to show me a random quote, we're going to start with a random quote here. That goes into there, and then we can call that function before we make the next and the previous buttons enabled, so you can then click on them. The next and the previous buttons then are somewhat can be wrapped up quite simply in each in 2 lines, where we want to ask for the next quote, which we display, or we go for in this case here we're going for the previous quote, here we're going for the next quote, and that and that and that are all the same, which basically brings us up to here. So the line that we grabbed from our list had those parts in it, so we convert that bit of text or quote line into a quote, so we can then basically have the text plus a new line plus some double dashes and the author name. So if there is no author name, it'll be anonymous, as I said. So if we just quickly jump into this next function again, I basically did have I did actually add in after the fact a line of code here to, if the next and the previous buttons were enabled and I clicked on those before starting with the random quote, what should the program do? Then in that case here I said, well, we should start with a random one rather than anything else, because going from this one here would be fine, -1 to 0, that would be fine, but anyway, it's what I've done. So we run the program again, we ask for something that's, we ask for a quote, and it says 1 today is worth 2 tomorrows, and if you don't like that one, click on the next button. Once you choose hope, anything is possible, and that's from Christopher Reeve. Let's go to the previous one and the previous one again. So that is where this program lies. Like I said, it's the start of something that may become something larger. If you would want to see this program developed further, you could add in something like a the ability to track a mood, like, you know, ranging from unhappy to happy. You could add in a word search. You could add in a little breathing type tool, which would say, you know, inhale, exhale sort of thing. Who knows where this might go? If you'd like to take part in it, let me know in the comments below, or you can send me a message. And until next time, happy coding, and I'll see you then, and bye.